Hello ladies and gentlemen, Decimus here, bringing you a build video for Magicka Templar. So what is this build and what does it do? Well, it does everything. Good damage, good healing, awesome tankiness, group utility, you name it. Current weaknesses of the build are a slight lack of burst damage, which is not to say that this build lacks in damage, it's just mostly steady DPS instead of burst. Another small weakness of this build is that it's mostly melee focused, meaning that immobilize and snares can make life difficult for you, though you can cleanse them. This build runs dual wield and sword and board. Dual wield to provide a big increase to damage and healing of your main DPS skills, and sword and board to make you extremely tanky should you happen to need some tankiness. The idea of this build is to basically deal more damage than your opponent or opponents and mitigate more damage than they do. So, without further ado, let's take a look at the skills. On the dual wield bar, Explosive Charge. This skill is pretty much mandatory for a build like this, as it's the only way you can guarantee to get to the melee range of an opponent. The reason I've picked this morph over the other is because A. It deals more damage, B. It's AoE and reveals Nightblades that are trained to cloak and also interrupts anyone casting within the AoE radius, and C. Because the build already runs Blazing Spear and Defensive Stance as CC, and most of the times you want to charge, you'll also want to throw a spear, so the CC is mostly useless because of that. Degeneration, mostly here for the major sorcery buff, though the extra dot damage and occasional healing you get from it is also useful. I know some people might think, why aren't you running the other morph when you have 20 HK health? The reason for that is the extra health is only a temporary buff unless you run it on both bars. The moment you weapon swap, you lose that health. It's useful when you're running skills that are scaling with maximum health on the same bar, but this build doesn't run any of them. Blazing Spear, briefly mentioned earlier. This skill is the main and one of the few CCs of this build. The spear requires some aiming and good timing to land, but it's undodgeable and deals pretty good damage as well. It also leaves ground damage over time effect, which can help against people holding block. Also, the CC comes after a slight delay, which allows you to create combos and have other things land at the same time as the spear. It's also very cheap, even in 5 heavy armor, so don't be afraid of using it a lot. Purifying Ritual. This is how you get out of roots and healing debuffs, as well as dots. Also gives some small healing and buffs you with major mending while you're within the area. Puncturing Sweep, main DPS skill of this build, deals really good sustained AoE damage and heals you at the same time for each target hit. It's usually enough to out-heal the incoming damage of someone. It's a frontal cone, so it does require some aiming. It's also good against Nightblades as it easily gets them out of cloak. This skill is also snaring the opponent for 70% for 2 seconds. Making landing any subsequent sweeps much easier. As the damaging ultimate here, you can basically use anything you like. I've played around with Ice Comet, Soul Assault and Downbreaker of Smiting, and they all have their pros and cons. Downbreaker is probably the best choice in terms of burst damage, but it can be hard to land against some targets, such as Zorks or Nightblades with Shadow Image. Soul Assault is the best choice against mind camping sorcerers and stamina builds trying to roll dodge away from you, but you'll regret picking it when you get interrupted. Ice Comet passively increases your damage and sustain with the major skilled passives, but it takes a lot of time to land, so your opponents can prepare for it, and it's not that effective as ultimate in my opinion. I usually go with the Downbreaker, but these are all good choices and it's up to personal preference. On the one-handed and shield bar, Channeled Focus. This is how you keep your Magicka pool up. For spending 748 Magicka, you get Major Ward and Major Resolve, which is the same as 8% damage mitigation, and you get 120 Magicka every half a second, which equals to 480 Magicka regeneration. Even in the worst case scenario where you have to leave the circle immediately and can never return to it, you get 1920 Magicka back over twice the cost of the spell. Defensive stance, one of the most important parts of this build. It's really good as a CC and damage mitigation tool. When you have your defensive stance up, you can fearlessly use sweeps against pretty much all Magicka builds. And if something gets reflected at the right time, it's very likely to result in a kill. Also, this skill passively helps your blocking, so it's a must-have on the bar. Purifying Light adds a nice bit of burst damage and keeps healing you for 6 seconds after it goes off, helping you survive things. An all-around useful skill. Vampire's Bane, a very nice dot and a long duration snare that helps you land sweeps and chase people. It also guarantees that Purifying Light deals some damage as well, since damage over time can't be dodged. It also gives you Major Prophecy, increasing your overall damage and healing output. Honor the Dead, this is an emergency heal and costs pretty much nothing when you use it while below 75% health, which is always. The 60% of cost returned over 8 seconds you get with this morph is essential when running with heavy armor. It returns around 1.9k Magicka over 8 seconds due to the high initial cost, giving you the equivalent of 238 Magicka per second, or 476 Magicka regen. Also, it's useful when playing with the group, as you can keep your allies alive with it and kind of force people to focus you the tankier target instead. As ultimate here, Empowering Sweep is the way to go. Not only is it an awesome skill in 1vx, reducing damage taken based on how many people you have hitting you in melee range, spamming wrecking blows, surprise attacks, all that shit, and making you practically unkillable for the duration if you use sweeps with it. But it also serves to activate the Edric Spear passives on this bar as well. So, this build runs 5 pieces of heavy armor, 1 light and 1 medium. 5 pieces of Gagrenic Soap. This is simply the best choice for this build, as you get everything you need with it. Extra sustain, more damage, as well as some more health to create that buffer against burst damage. Also, the 5 piece can be really useful in group PvP if you need to resurrect someone. 3 pieces of willpower adds to the damage and healing output of this build. 2 pieces of Malubets, one of the most important parts of this build. This set combos really nicely with Magicka Templar, as it increases the healing you receive by 30%, making your sweeps keep you alive much better. Also, it's pretty much guaranteed to proc all the time, since you're tanking most of the incoming damage instead of trying to avoid it. And lastly, 2 pieces of Toruk's Pact, just to add some more damage and healing. I run Tri-stat enchants on all armor pieces because you need all 3 stats. The armor pieces with highest armor value, chest and shield, have reinforced trait, each giving you additional armor worth around 0.8% damage mitigation. Helm and legs have infused to provide more base stats. Small parts are impenetrable for that extra tankiness, and also because the Apprentice Mundus this build uses isn't as good with Divines as something like Shadow, which you'd probably run with builds that have higher crit chance. This build has pretty low crit chance. So basically you're choosing between 14 spell damage from Divines, which is about 0.2% damage, and 3.8% critical damage reduction from Impenetrable. So yeah, my Malubet shoulder is still Divines, but I aim to replace that as soon as I find an Impenetrable one. On all Chivalry I have spell damage enchants and arcane trait for more damage and healing. The weapons run defending on one-handed and shield bar for extra tankiness, and stamina restoration enchant to help with sustain. On dual wield bar I have near hand on both weapons for maximized damage output and some extra defense against magic damage. Disease enchant for a small healing debuff on opponent, and Magicka Restoration enchant to occasionally help with Magicka Sustain. You can craft or purchase most of the gear, but Malubet does require you to run weight receivers on veteran mode for the helmet and use undaunted keys for the shoulders. Or you can purchase those from Cyril Merchant when they're available. The food this build uses is the legendary food, for which you get recipe by completing a questline in Wrothgar. It is quite expensive, but it's definitely the best choice for this build, as it gives you everything the build needs. As potions, I use the Tri-Stat potions. And this is how I've spent my champion points. I have 75 points in the Steed constellation, most of them going into critical damage reduction, and rest split between block cost reduction and spell resistance. The main reason this constellation has so many points in it is the 75 point passive, which gives you quite a lot of mitigation when you're on the one-handed and shield bar. In the Lady constellation I have 78 points, most of them going into physical damage reduction, as the spell resistance of this build is already much higher than physical resistance, and defensive stance also helps a lot against it. The Lord constellation has 14 points, most of them in healing recede for a little better heals. In Tower I have 103 points and 100 of them in Magician. This is because spells are really costly when using heavy armor, and for that reason Magician makes a bigger difference when you put points into it. Lower I have 54 points and most of them in Arcanist for some extra Magicka regen. In the Shadow I have 10 points and most of them in dodge and break free cost reduction. In the Blue constellation I have 120 points in the Apprentice, most of them in Elfborn for more base damage. Rest are split between the remaining passives. In the Atronach I have 0 points, and in the Ritual I have 47 in Thaumaturge, which increase most of the damage this build deals, including sweeps. The most optimal race for this build is Breton. You get 10% extra Magicka to boost your healing and damage. The 3% cost reduction also makes a big difference when you're wearing heavy armor. And the spell resistance passive actually gives you 6% worth of spell mitigation, which is quite a lot and helps your survivability. Other good choices are Altmer, Nord and Argonian. Yes, I did say Argonian, and I'll get to that shortly. So as Altmer you get more Magicka, just like Bretons, some Magicka regen and 4% elemental damage. The last two passives are less useful due to heavy armor and the fact that this build doesn't deal any elemental damage apart from Vampire's Bane. Nord you get more health recovery, which is slightly better with heavy armor. More health and frost resistance, as frost builds are quite popular these days, this can be useful. And most importantly, you get 6% less damage taken, which should make you incredibly tanky. And lastly, Argonian. Yes, Argonian. A bit surprisingly, Argonian can work very well with this build, thanks to the plus 9% healing passive. Almost everything this build does heals you in one way or another, so boosting that by 9% is a pretty big deal. The other passives are mediocre, though the poison resistance could be nice next patch with poison crafting and a lot of other stamina changes coming. So that's going to do it for the video. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked the video, feel free to like and or subscribe. If you hated the video, feel free to dislike. I will see you next time. Bye.